The following are two amazing stories about reincarnation that are full of incredible facts and detail that proves the soul continues its journey from one incarnation to another. The biggest question most people ask is, why does this happen, and why do so few people remember their past lives? Number 2. Edward Austrian, who was James, a World War I soldier. From very early in his childhood, Edward had a phobia of dark, drizzly, damp weather and often became ill with throat problems. 4-year-old Edward Austrian had been complaining of a sore throat since his mother could remember, where Edward began referring to his sore throat as his shot, which was a very unusual description for a sore throat from a child so young. His mother thought nothing of it. Many doctors examined him to try to find a reason for his constant sore throats, which eventually led to an unnecessary tonsil removal, which then led to an unexplained cyst developing in Edward's throat. But then things started to escalate when Edward started telling his mother, Patricia, vivid stories from World War I, stories that a 4-year-old child could not have absorbed in one so young, or even observed from a movie or a TV show. He claims that his name was James and was 18 years old in France. He said that we were walking along through the mud. The weather was miserable, cold and damp, and his rifle was heavy. He remembered seeing trees, but the landscape was desolate. Edward spoke about life in the trenches and the day-to-day horrific grind of the war. Then one day, his stories went to another level when he graphically described the story of how he was shot in the throat. He said that he heard a shot from behind. First it went through someone else, then hit him square in the back of the neck, where he felt his throat fill with blood, and he passed away. After describing these details to his mother, they found that the cyst then disappeared, something of which the doctors could not explain. Edward had somehow transferred symptoms from his previous life to his new life, and by getting them out into the open, by discussing them, had somehow led to his healing. This was an incredibly vivid description of war from a boy who was only 4 years old. Number 1. Robert Snow, who was James Carroll Beckwith. Snow is a retired captain of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, who was in charge of the Department of Homicide and Robbery and the Department of Organised Crime. Bob's story begins at a party where a fellow police officer had conducted past life regressions as a hobby. Captain Snow thought past life regression was either fabricated or fantasized. The past life regression therapist, called Dr. Griffith, who was also a police officer, dared Captain Snow to have a past life regression himself, of which Snow agreed to participate in, but remained sceptical, as he did not believe in reincarnation. When the therapist began, she instructed Snow to imagine that he is relaxing comfortably in his chair at home, where Snow then closed his eyes. Initially, Snow was finding the questions too strange and found it hard to keep a straight face. But then a strange feeling started to come over him during the regression, where he started to experience powerful and very clear past life memories, and the past life events that he was recalling appeared as clear as if he was awake and conscious. He recalled several different lifetimes, but the one that was most prominent was as a portrait painter in what seemed to be the 19th century. Captain Snow was able to recount specific details regarding this lifetime as an artist. One very clear memory involved him painting a portrait of a hunchback woman. He vividly remembered the experience of the paint strokes that were used to create the painting, and even of the questioning of why someone with a pronounced deformity would want a portrait. He was then able to dig deeper into his thoughts as the 19th century artist. He painted portraits to make money, but hated painting portraits, and he used the name Jack, who had a walking stick. His wife and he spent time in France, but they had no children because his wife was not able to conceive. They regularly argued about having a lack of money, but despite that, they had a happy marriage. He had an art studio with skylights and had once stayed at an estate with large gardens. He died in the autumn of 1917 in a large city with tall buildings. The experience of the regression was such that he became obsessed in trying to find out whether this artist in his previous life had actually existed, but was still faced with a dilemma of not really believing in reincarnation and feeling that he had somehow absorbed the story from a book, in school or at a museum. Snow began to methodically examine art books, visited art galleries, and contacted art dealers, searching for the portrait of the hunchback woman he had seen in his regression, but unable to identify any historical artists consistent with the regression. After a year of trying to find the portrait of the hunchback woman, he came to a dead end. He concluded that it was unlikely that he would ever be able to identify the artist seen during his regression. Snow's wife, Melanie, suggested that they have a holiday in New Orleans to celebrate their anniversary. It was on the last day of their trip when Bob wandered into an art gallery in the French Quarter of New Orleans. In the gallery which Snow had walked into by chance, he miraculously discovered the portrait of the hunchback woman he had seen in his regression. On viewing the portrait, he suddenly felt an electrical charge surge up and down his arms and legs. For the next several minutes, he didn't move from in front of the portrait. The situation began to feel like a very vivid dream, and he had to keep telling himself over and over again that he wasn't dreaming. He had to convince himself that stumbling upon the painting was too bizarre to be true. For a few moments, he believed he'd had some kind of stroke. He then felt he had to find a rational answer for what was happening. But things like this just didn't happen in real life. What were the chances, after all the months of systematic searching, that it would just happen onto the painting like this? What were the chances that his wife would just happen to want to go to New Orleans, and that he would just happen to visit the gallery just when they happened to have the painting for sale? From the portrait, Snow learned that the painter's name was J. Carroll Beckwith. Snow again became filled with doubt, where he felt he must have seen the portrait at a museum or art gallery. But things got even weirder. He asked the gallery worker where else his portrait had been displayed, but the worker replied, "No, you would not have seen this work before. This portrait has been in private hands for years, and there has not been an exhibition of Beckwith's work in the last 75 years, because he wasn't that famous." Snow was later able to inspect Beckwith's diaries, as well as an unpublished autobiography. To add further evidence to this amazing story, it turns out that there was a physical resemblance between Snow and Carroll Beckwith. When images were lying side by side in the same pose, even though Snow was a bit older and heavier, the facial features are very similar, where both had a moustache. Captain Snow finally came to the conclusion that he had been Carroll Beckwith, who had indeed used the name Jack in a prior lifetime. He has stated that he has proven reincarnation, and if this were a police case, the evidence he compiled would stand up in court. Robert Snow even visited the grave of Carroll Beckwith, and as he looked down at the grave, his left knee started to shake uncontrollably, and he became drenched in sweat. Captain Snow has written a book called Looking for Carroll Beckwith, which documents his reincarnation case in detail.